I want to show you a little test I did this morning. The idea behind the test is to show how the signal, electromagnetic radiation, radio waves, whatever you want to call them, are emitted from the rear of a cell phone and not the front. In other words, when you're using the cell phone, the signal, the radiation, travels away from your head and not towards your head. The antenna systems in modern cell phones are designed this way on purpose. The cell phone manufacturers have a few good reasons for doing it that way. One of them is, of course, the potential health issues, which is hotly debated, and at some point somebody's going to come out with a definitive report. And of course the cell phone companies know that if it turns out that somebody declares that cell phones are bad for your health and do cause tumors, and if that report is done in a convincing way, the cell phone companies will have a lot to answer for. So it's very much in their interests to design the antenna in the cell phone to radiate as much of the signal as possible away from your head. There's another very good reason for them doing that. Very simply, the cell phone works better that way. If the cell phone was to radiate a signal equally in all directions, much in the same way as a light bulb gives off light equally in all directions, then a good portion of the radiated energy would simply be absorbed by your head because the cell phone is right up against the side of your head. And ignoring the health issues for a moment, that causes a great deal of the transmitted energy to simply be wasted. That degrades the performance of the cell phone. It requires that the cell phone operate at a higher transmitter power in order for the signal to reach the base station. So without anybody having to cause any punishment or problems for the cell phone companies, it is already in their own selfish interests to design cell phones to work this way. And I just want to show you with a very simple demonstration how this is in fact the case. You've all heard that annoying buzzing sound that cell phones cause on other pieces of electronic equipment. Well, I'm going to use that now to my advantage to show you what I'm talking about. I have here a simple portable radio. It's a fairly cheap device, and like a lot of equipment of this nature, it is susceptible to cell phone interference. Particularly on the rear of the radio at this spot here. If I hold a cell phone up to this point while the cell phone is busy on a call, you can clearly hear a loud buzzing sound coming from the radio. Then I have here a fairly standard Nokia E70 cell phone. This phone is already connected to the landline on the desk behind me. In other words, there's a phone call open between the cell phone and landline. And if I simply bring the rear of the cell phone close to the rear of the radio, you will hear that distinctive buzzing sound that we're all familiar with. There it is there. You'll notice if I move the cell phone up and down, the intensity, the volume of the buzzing sound changes. The reason for that is simply that the antenna in this particular cell phone is here at the top. It's inside, you can't see it on the outside, it's behind the plastic panel. But when that spot is brought into contact with the sensitive part of the radio at the back, that's where you hear the sort of most intense buzzing sound. Now, interestingly, if I turn the cell phone over so that the front of the cell phone, the part that would be facing your head, if I put that part against the radio, watch what happens. No buzzing. Turn the rear to the radio, there's the buzzing sound. And the reason for that is very simple. Almost all of the energy radiated by the antenna, the transmitter and antenna system in the cell phone, comes out the back and moves away from the rear of the cell phone. So when you're busy talking on the cell phone, instead of a good chunk of that energy going into your head, most of it in fact is directed away. It's not possible with a test as crude as using a little portable radio to tell you how much of it moves away. But I would say realistically that at least 90%, probably somewhat higher, of the radiated energy from the cell phone is moving out the back and away from your head. Now, there are various companies marketing chips and gizmos. Some of them have different names for them that you're supposed to stick onto your cell phone, either on the front or the back. In some cases the front and the back. In some cases you're supposed to stick more than one sticker on. Some companies tell you that theirs lasts forever. Others tell you you've got to replace them every so many weeks or months or whatever it is. Now, I've seen no evidence whatsoever that these would work. The methods claimed by the manufacturers of these stickers sound largely suspect. They talk about harmonizing the waves from the cell phone. Now, the simple fact is, the moment you start changing the nature of the radio emission from the cell phone to any significant degree, the cell phone will simply stop working. So clearly they're not actually doing that. One of the concerns I have is the antenna design in the cell phone is critical. If you were to open this up and actually have a look at the antenna, you'd find a funny little squiggly shaped metal object in here. Now, that is shaped very precisely to fractions of a millimeter in order to perform the function that it does very precisely. If you introduce a metallic object onto the rear of the cell phone, you're going to interfere with the way that antenna works. And the radiation pattern, in other words, the shape of the beam, the way the signal radiates out the back of the cell phone, will be altered by putting any metallic object here. And one of my concerns is that as soon as you put something on the back there, it is possible that instead of 90% or so of the energy being radiated away from your head, which obviously makes the cell phone safer, you could, by putting a metal object on the cell phone, be causing the radiation pattern to be disrupted in such a way that in fact the amount of energy that comes out the front of the cell phone and into your head is actually increased. In other words, it is quite possible that the claimed effect of these little stick-on goodies could in fact be the opposite of what is claimed. In other words, instead of reducing the amount of radiation that you're exposed to, the possibility exists, the very real possibility exists, that they could in fact do exactly the opposite. I'm not claiming that that is the case. I'm simply saying that from a point of view of antenna design theory, any engineering person who works with that sort of stuff will be able to tell you that introducing any metallic object that close to an antenna will very definitely upset the radiation pattern. And as I showed you with the simple demonstration with the radio, the cell phone is already designed very effectively to cause most of the radiated energy to move away from your head in the first place. So I definitely will not be sticking anything at all onto my cell phone, and I strongly recommend that you don't either.